Hello there everyone, my name is Gabriel. This is Devotionables, brief devotions for busy people, and today we are starting a new series where we are going through the entire book of Ruth. Now it's a short book, but it's a very interesting story and an essential part of the redemptive narrative, the story that God is telling about how He has worked and is working in His world to bring about redemption, to bring a Savior. And so I'm very excited to start this series. We have a number of different folks going through the book of the Bible. Today, though, just want to talk about big, broad overview. So I want to encourage you to read through the book of Ruth. It's a short story, and you can either do it in one setting or just read along with us as we're studying every day. You'll find in your English Bibles that the book of Ruth comes right after Judges. And it makes total sense. There's in the very first verse of Ruth, it says, and now in the days when the judges ruled. So it connects to that time period. In the Hebrew Bible, the story comes in the writings, what's known as the writings, and follows right after Proverbs. And so if you'll go back to last week, when we were doing devotionables, we went through the Proverbs, so very shortly, but we intentionally ended with Proverbs 31, knowing we were going into this series. And so that Proverbs 31 then, we think of Ruth is the consummate example of a Proverbs 31 woman. And Scott Hardy, who taught on that devotion, reminded us that really that's for anybody, and we see that played out even in this book, that all the characters in this book here, whether it's Naomi that we're going to meet, Boaz we'll meet, and Ruth, that they are virtuous, God-fearing people showing us what it means to live with wisdom. That is to live under the fear of the Lord, to live like God is King. Now, what order is right? They're both really good. We shouldn't really stress that. And I think it's very fine where it is in the English Bible. And it makes a lot of sense. And Dr. Adam Howe, who wrote this phenomenal book here, and that's the outline we're going to be using as we study through Ruth together. We'll talk about that on the next time together. So, Ruth, a top 10 book of the Bible for me. And so I want us to read, though, a verse that's not even in Ruth. And I hope it'll make sense here in just a moment. But in Psalms chapter 2, Psalm 2, verse 12. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and you perish in the way. For his wrath is quickly kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. This is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. T.J. Betts, one of the Old Testament professors at Southern Seminary, he's a church member at Ninth and Baptist Church. He preached on this passage like 18 months ago. So it was like the summer of 2021. And since that sermon, this verse has just been one of those that's been lodged in my heart by the grace of God. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. And that's how we should read the Psalms. But I couldn't help it. That verse was just resonating as I was reading through Ruth in preparation of our devotionables here together over the next several weeks. It is an example of how we should take refuge in the Lord. And it's not just Israelites, but Ruth is from Moab. We will learn that early on in the story. She was a Moabitess. And it's just an example of God fulfilling His promises to Abraham. And her life mirrors Abraham quite a bit, and we'll let those who are talking about that get more into that. But that God promised that through Abraham would all the nations of the earth be blessed, because he was sending back to Genesis 3 that one who would come, who would crush the serpent's head, who would conquer sin and death, and would rule with justice and love God. And Jesus Christ has come. And the book of Ruth is a little bit of a story about that. It also reminds us that no matter what is going on in and around us, the world, no matter how bad it gets, there's still people who are faithful to God, who are taking refuge in Him, and that God blesses them. That God is working all things for their good and His glory. It's easy to come to the Scriptures, especially narrative, and think, man, that story of Ruth, or how God protected Paul during a shipwreck. And we kind of isolate ourselves that the God of Ruth and Paul, we can take refuge in Him as well. And that He is still writing a story This is a story of providence, the story of Ruth, God's loving providence, that as people are interacting, they're making free will choices, but that God is behind the scene, causing all things to work for our good in His glory. Ultimately, we'll see that's bringing about a king, the king that was needed then, in time and space, David, and ultimately the king that we all need, Jesus. Blessed are all who take refuge in Him. We'll finish with the words of Boaz, the words from Numbers. May the Lord bless you.